I give it another 30 seconds, Barry.
Yep. Okay, I think it's time that we should get started. People will still be joining probably. So I'm Barry Goodison. I chair of the CMOS Ottawa Centre, and on behalf of that centre, we'd like to welcome everybody here today, not only from the Ottawa region, but across the country and the US as appropriate. And I'd also like to welcome all of the folks from the private sector. There's many have registered from the private sector, and we're really pleased to see that, and hope that CMOS can continue to offer you talks that are of interest. A couple of housekeeping notes as we get started. I'd ask you to turn off your video and audio. This minimizes background noise and helps maximize bandwidth for the, especially when we have a larger audience. We'll be handling the questions at the end using the chat function. So we ask that you type your questions into chat. You can type it in anytime during the talk, and I will moderate that at the end. I will present the your question on behalf of the speaker, and also some questions may get combined if they're similar. Finally, I'd like to note this session will be recorded so that you know that. And it will be uploaded in the near future to the CMOS YouTube channel, where you can also find all of the past talks that the center has given, and CMOS as well. So it will be available after the fact. You can let others know that perhaps didn't see it, that they can go there. So I would like to now turn over to Jim Abraham, who is the Vice President of CMOS, and I believe should be the President next year of the organization, to introduce today's speaker. Jim?
Thanks very much, Barry. Yeah, I can't wait to be President. Certainly I'd like to, on behalf of CMOS, I'd like to congratulate you, Barry, and the Halifax and the Ottawa Centre. You guys do an amazing job of providing some really interesting webinars, and today is just a great example of that. I'm really a pleasure to introduce Laura Twidle. She's from the CatIQ. She's the managing director there, but she's a meteorologist like me, and her everyday work is really what most of us meteorologists are passionate about, is extreme weather and catastrophes, and her organization provides a level of service predicting and analyzing past catastrophic events. So it's a really interesting line of work, and I've had the pleasure of working with Laura since she joined CatIQ for the last 5 years. I've been on the steering committee with her and others planning the annual conference on catastrophes. It is my favorite conference, even more so than the CMOS Congress. I really enjoyed it. It's a multidisciplinary event, really focused on what can we do together, private sector, public sector, academics, nonprofit groups, to really make our society more resilient to climate change and to extreme weather. And we talk about really interesting, I was on a call recently with Laura planning an upcoming session, talking about how do we change behavior so that people actually take action to minimize impacts from extreme weather. So it's my pleasure to welcome Laura to join us today. And she is indeed going to talk about the impacts of extreme weather on the Canadian insurance industry.
Well, thank you, Jim, for that lovely introduction, and to the really nice shout out to CatIQ Connect, the conference that we host. Thank you to CMOS for the invitation today, and then thank you to everyone for taking the time out of your lunch if you're out in the east, or to start off your day in the west. CatIQ, as we're more commonly known as than Catastrophe Indices and Quantification Incorporated. We're based in the Toronto area. We are a very small team. We are 2 people operationally. And so today I hope to give you a better idea of the impacts of the events that we meteorologists get excited about, and at least show you this from the financial side. Of course, there's the people side, like mental health and deaths, and I won't be touching on this today, but of course it's not something to be ignored. And I think this is such an important talk today to give to folks that might not know that this data exists. So I'm happy to be here to present this, because when I tell people what I do, usually the response is, I didn't realize the insurance industry cared at all about the weather. So I hope by the end of this presentation, you realize that the industry does have a lot of impacts that come from this. So I thought I would start with the big picture and talk about weather and insurance. Going down to the basics, insurance is a transfer of risk. And in this exchange, the policyholder or the homeowner or the car owner provides this fee, also known as the premium, to the insurance company to take on this risk. And so the insurance company then will take on this protection for this asset, the home or the business or the car, against things that could damage, including theft or perils like wind, hail, fire, and water. And so the graph on the screen is from Swiss Re, which basically is the insurer that insures the insurers. They're a reinsurance company. And what this shows is the global insured catastrophic loss. And this is showing on the screen up to 2019. I've added in their 2020 number. I couldn't find their updated slide. But in any case, the light blue is the weather-related catastrophes, and man-made, which is the green, would be things like riots, explosions, and terrorism. So in 2020, there was 89 billion that was incurred, 81 of which was from natural catastrophes, like hurricanes, severe storms, and floods, and 8 billion was from man-made perils. So now, also from Swiss Re, what I'm showing is the insured versus uninsured. So what we call this the economic loss. So it's the total loss due to catastrophes annually. And we see the insured loss in the dark blue and the uninsured loss in the light blue. So there certainly is a large part of the world that isn't covered for certain types of perils. Could be in less developed countries where insurance doesn't exist, or even in Canada, we have some insurance gaps, as we'll call them, perils that aren't covered, or there's people that aren't taking on the insurance or taking it up. So through these past 2 graphs, I hope that you've already seen a little bit about how severe weather plays a very large impact on insurance. And then getting down to more of the near term, the forecasting side, when there's either a strong low pressure system that could cause damaging winds, or a small scale event, a tornado or flash flooding or so on. Insurers want to know if they need to ready their claims team. They might expect to get a lot of calls coming in, so they need to have their team ready. They might want to set aside reserves, or even temporarily stop writing business in an area that's going to be impacted. So narrowing down the focus a bit to Canada's market, I just wanted to talk about this. So I mentioned a bit on insurance gaps and so on. So just to get a taste of what the Canadian industry offers, all home insurance covers wind, hail, and fire. So if your shingles get ripped off and you have insurance, you're likely covered for that. And same for the other two perils that I mentioned. Most cover, or you can have it as an add-on, as sewer backup. So this is, say we have flash flooding and the water from the street goes back into your basement and that gross water's in there. There would be damage from that. So that's what we call sewer backup. So that's mostly offered. And then we have overland flood insurance, which only came into the market in 2015. Of course, floods have been happening, since forever. Rain happens. And so when we're looking at the insured loss data, our database goes back to 2008. Just keep in mind that it's not that floods haven't occurred. Again, we're looking at insured loss data, and there has been a bit of evolution in the overland flood in particular, where overland flood is a body of water overflowing and entering a region where it's not expected to be. And then on the overland flood note, if you weren't aware of it, there's an important Canadian task force going on right now for flood insurance and relocation. And that's kind of a partnership, or I don't know if partnership's the right word, but a great collaboration between the government, like Public Safety Canada and NRCan, and other stakeholders that have been modeling flood like the insurance sector. So, and this is all around potentially starting some sort of high risk flood insurance pool for Canada to be able to offer the flood insurance for those folks that can't get it if they are in a high risk area or a flood zone. It might be that the insurance isn't offered to them because it's too risky, or it's that the insurance is just too expensive because it floods annually or every other year. So there is work that's being done for that in the background, and a quick Google search on the Canadian Flood Task Force will take you to more information on that, but I thought I would mention it. So I hope that summary provides more clarity on the connection to weather and insurance. And I'm going to talk for a few slides about how CatIQ fits into all this. So CatIQ is independent from any insurance company. We collect the loss data from the primary insurers. So the Intax and Allstates and Travelers. So the primary insurers, I'll just call them insurers from now on. We collect data from the insurers as well as exposure estimates, and I'll get a little bit more into what data exactly in a slide. We're a subsidiary of a globally recognized company called Perils, and they have data very similar to us, but they're in Europe, Turkey, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. All the work that we do, we pass through our advisory committee, which is made up of members from the industry. We also have Environment Canada on there, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction. So we all come together and talk about what kind of data is useful for the Canadian market and so on. And we also host the Canadian Catastrophe Conference called CatIQ Connect, as Jim mentioned earlier. So we do three main things at CatIQ. The first is that we are home of the catastrophe database. Now, when I mention a catastrophe, or I might call it a CAT, this is any event that causes at least 25 million of insured loss. And this database that we have goes back to 2008. And what we do is we produce the descriptive write-ups on why the event occurred, the property damage that was seen. We collect the media and create damage footprints as well. Now, the loss data that we have is by province and by line of business. So lines of business being things like personal property, so like a home, commercial, a business, and auto, so a vehicle. So we can see all that broken out. And we have claim count information, the loss itself, as well as external expenses. The second part that we do at CatIQ is we produce the industry exposure database. And so exposure, insurance exposure, to put it in the easiest sense, is all of the risk that the insurer or the industry stands to lose if something horrible was to happen. So we collect this by peril, natural peril. So flood would be one of those things. So for example, if Area X, I'm not going to jinx anybody by saying a name, but was completely flooded, everything was damaged in there, that exposure that we have is what the industry and for the companies that participate with us, that's what they would lose directly to that. So by having the exposure data alongside the loss, we're able to see if there's an incoming event, like a storm or a hurricane or something like that. Insurers can see what they stand to lose in certain areas, compare to them to previous events, and see what the percentage lost is, so they can get a sense on what they might lose from this upcoming event. So exposure data, we have this again by natural peril, by line of business, as I mentioned before. And instead of being at the provincial level, we have this at the FSA level, or the forward sortation area, which is just the first 3 digits of the postal code. And we update this annually for all of Canada. The final thing that we do, as Jim mentioned, I am a meteorologist, and we forecast catastrophes. We will potentially issue something up to 3 days in advance if it looks like it will potentially cross the $25 million threshold. Again, it's a little different than public forecasting, since we are looking for a dollar amount to be crossed. And it's not just a dollar amount, it's the insured dollar amount. So I mentioned flooding. There's a bit of an insurance gap in Canada that exists right now. And so we're looking for insured loss to be over 25 million. Right, so now that I've talked a little bit about what are basically how you understand that we have this data, I'm going to do a review of 2020, and then I will get into the top catastrophes that Canada has ever had for the insurance industry. So last year we had a fairly active winter. Usually we have one event, but we had a handful. And on January 11th and 12th, Ontario and Quebec were welcomed by a spring-like thaw. Temperatures in southern Ontario rose to a record-breaking 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, and there was more than 60 millimeters of rain that fell in some places, and even 78 millimeters in Toronto. As you would know, Environment Canada issues a rainfall warning when there's 50 millimeters of rain in less than 24 hours. So 78 millimeters in Toronto in the winter on frozen ground can be quite impactful. And we certainly saw that with basement floods and overland flooding and so on. A little bit further east, Montreal had about 8 centimeters of snow on the ground to start, and temperatures rose to 7 degrees Celsius. And they received 40 millimeters of rain. Quebec City reported 17 centimeters of snow on the ground at the onset, then received 25 millimeters of rain before changing back to snow and getting another 24 centimeters. The month's worth of rain in a day and a half caused bodies of water to overflow, and significant reports of basement floods and roads being flooded were reported. Along with the rain, there was also ice pellets and freezing rain, including 20 millimeters of ice accretion in the Dundalk Highlands in Ontario. And this downed tree limbs. And when tree limbs fall, they can fall onto hydro lines or vehicles or homes, which then are insured insurance concerns. So ice accretion can also be quite an issue. This event had 125,000 Hydro-Quebec customers in the dark and thousands of Hydro One, and resulted in over 97 million of insured loss. Now, the second cat of the season, or of 2020, was in the west, and it puts Eastern Canada's rainfall amount to shame. The atmospheric river on January 31st through February 1st in BC resulted in flash flooding, landslides, and flooded properties across the Lower Mainland and southern Vancouver Island. To paint the story for you, this event occurred at the very end of January, a January that was already the 4th wettest on record and Vancouver Airport reported a measly 1 day without rain for the month. Rainfall totals ranged in the Fraser Valley up to 140 millimeters, sea to sky and Sunshine Coast up to 170, Vancouver area was up to 90, and the maximum was 371 millimeters in Effingham, which is located on the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. The rain caused 100-year flow return periods on southern Vancouver Island. 5 to 20-year flow rates were observed in the North Shore and Vancouver. And in addition to the flooding, there were also strong winds up to 90 kilometers per hour that put 40,000 BC Hydro customers in the dark. And this was over 40 million. Hop, skip, and a jump to the end of April. So jumping a few months, but we did have some smaller events in there. We have the spring thaw and ice jam season. On April 25th and 26th, an ice jam formed on the Athabasca River near Fort McMurray, Alberta. We just passed the year anniversary for that event. As the jam grew to 25 kilometers, ice debris was pushed onto the Clearwater River, which runs adjacent to the lower town site of Fort McMurray. Water levels rose by 4.5 to 6 meters across the low-lying areas, including downtown. Approximately 13,000 people were evacuated between April 26th and May 2nd. So just to pause here for a second, in terms of the data we collect or what insurers stand to lose, when people are evacuated, this is called non-physical damage. So if they have to be put up in hotels or they have to eat at a restaurant because they can't be at home, this would also be covered by insurance. So this is an additional cost to the event in addition to the actual physical damage that occurs due to the flooding. This flood was deemed a 100-year event by Alberta officials. Water levels fluctuated through the week, but the decline really started on April 29th. By the morning of April 30th, water levels had dropped 4 meters on the Athabasca and 1.5 on the Clearwater. By May 1st, downtown was mostly dry, at least on the surface. The ice jam on the Athabasca River and the secondary jam in the Clearwater released on May 2nd, allowing waterways to drop below flood stage. Extensive damage was reported due to overland flooding and sewer backup. Many areas were without power from April 26th to May 4th. When power is shut down for an extended period of time, you also run the risk of having food spoilage and having to throw white goods like refrigerators and freezers and that, which would also be another cost to that. This event resulted in over 562 million. Let's fast forward to June, and we have the start of traditional cat season. We call it traditional cat season or just cat season in general from June to August, historically because of these severe storms that happen in the prairies. They're almost daily. If you live out there, you know. Of course, if they hit a populated center, they can cause some significant damage. And another little tidbit, an emergency manager once mentioned at our conference that cats tend to happen on the weekend. And of course, thinking that this is just something they notice or they exaggerate because they're the ones that have to work on the weekend and that. But so far, all of the events that I've mentioned have occurred on the weekend, at least the start date. So Calgary Hailstorm followed suit by occurring on Saturday, June 13th, when severe thunderstorms formed along the foothills and then tracked to the northeast. Hailstones of up to grapefruit-size hail pelted Dutchess, Alberta. Northeast Calgary felt the force of tennis ball-size hail. Large hail also was felt in other parts of southern Alberta. It wasn't just the massive hail that caused damage, but heavy rainfall added salt to the wounds. Calgary received up to 60 millimeters from the storms, and strong wind gusts were also felt. The system tracked into Saskatchewan on June 14th and also brought softball-sized hail to Brantspeth and led to flash flooding in Humboldt, where the mayor then declared a local state of emergency. As shown through the images, siding on the buildings were shredded, windows smashed, and dented cars seems to be an understatement. This became Canada's costliest hailstorm on record at $1.3 billion of insured loss. As 2020 was the year of Calgary hailstorms, on Friday, July 24th, around 6 p.m., there was another round of severe thunderstorms. Hail the size of tennis balls smacked southeastern Calgary this time, with reports of 2 to golf ball size hail in the surrounding areas. Street flooding occurred in south central and southeastern parts of the city, and flash flooding was also reported in Drumheller. Hail that fell on Airdrie was reported to be billiard ball size. The hail damaged buildings and cars, but also notably plants and crops as the cells tracked east before diminishing south of Hannah. On the civic long weekend, Sunday, August 2nd into the holiday Monday of August 3rd, we saw the final cat of traditional cat season. A broad upper level trough moving in the BC coast over the first few days of August sent several pulses of energy over the Rockies. On August 2nd, the storms generally remained close to the foothills. Large hail cores were reported northwest of Calgary and south of Grand Prairie. Golf ball size hail fell between Morley and Cochrane along the Trans-Canada Highway. And on August 3rd, storms initiated along the foothills but made further eastward progress through the afternoon and evening hours, where tennis ball size hail pelted Drumheller. There was an EF0 tornado north of Youngstown, and cells moved east into Saskatchewan, and large hail and strong winds impacted Macklin. This event mostly resulted in hail damage in Alberta, with some wind damage from the tornado, as well as wind damage in Edmonton and flash flooding in Edmonton. And the cells that impacted Saskatchewan resulted in downed power lines and trees, and a roof was partially torn off a hotel, in addition to some hail damage. Between this event and the last event, these resulted in over 220 million. On Saturday, October 10th, southern Quebec was experiencing mild temperatures with higher humidity for this time of the year. Low pressure system's cold front swept across Quebec in the afternoon, and a line of strong storms developed from near the Ontario-Quebec border northeast through the Laurentians. This line intensified as it neared Mont-Tremblant around 3 p.m. and continued south-southeast towards Montreal by the evening. Golf ball size hail pelted Saint-Sauveur. Though hail was no longer supported by the surrounding environment, the stores then coalesced into a squall line with strong wind gusts. Montreal Airport reported up to 87 kilometers per hour, and their Sherbrooke at 78 kilometers per hour. There were 50,000 Hydro-Quebec customers in the dark. This was mostly concentrated in Montreal and the surrounding areas. And the photo on the left was taken by Alice Wood, who is actually attending today. She's a meteorologist at Environment Canada. The final cat of 2020 was on the morning of Sunday, November 15th, and strong southerly wind gusts swept across the lower Great Lakes region. Gusts of 50 kilometers per hour moved through southwestern Ontario, but stronger gusts were felt along the Lake Erie shoreline. And by the afternoon, the low pressure system had tracked further northeast, and the cold front coming in provided a second blast of stronger gusts for southwestern and south central Ontario, where they were above 80 kilometers per hour for several hours. At least a dozen stations reported gusts of 100 kilometers per hour or higher, including Toronto Pearson, and Niagara 1 with 141 kilometers per hour. The Northern Tornadoes Project confirmed an EF0 strength downburst and an EF1 strength downburst in Dunnville and Ingersoll, and there was an EF1 tornado in northern Georgetown. In addition to the wind damage, there was also extreme wave action on Lake Erie and flooding along the northern and eastern shores. This resulted in more than 540,000 hydro customers being affected across the region, and more than 50,000 were still in the dark 2 days later. This resulted in 88 million. So I've shown you all the events that were over 25 million for 2020. Now, these are just some images on the screen of what we call the notable events, which they fall short of the $25 million threshold, but they're above 10 million. So they can be quite impactful to the specific area that they occur in. The difference that we curate these events, but the main difference being that we don't produce formal loss estimates for these notable events. So we keep them in the database with the write-ups and the footprints, but I'm unable to tell you that this event exactly caused 12 million or something like that. And we produce these as they might be very impactful events in less populated areas, since we are since catastrophes are a threshold of 25 million, they tend to be concentrated in populated areas. So notable events can pick up on those severe events, but in less populated areas. And there were a dozen of those in 2020, which do add up for the cost, the annual cost over the year. It was more than 100 million. All right, so I was joking that all of the events in 2020 happened on the weekend. And so I was thinking back to this emergency manager that said, oh, CATs always happen on the weekend. So I thought I would take a quick look into our database and see if that's a real thing. So I defined weekend as a start date from Friday to Sunday, and weekday Monday to Thursday. Weekend is in orange and weekday is in the blue. As you can see, there's not really anything that indicates otherwise, except 2020, all of a sudden, the year of, we see that it's all weekend, and I added in the 3 events that we've had so far for 2021, and 2 out of the 3 have been on weekdays. So overall, they're pretty even, but if we're going to normalize it, since there's more days in a weekday, in my definition of a weekday, then the weekend actually does have a bit of a bias to it. So the weekend wins. I thought I would pop that in there to take a break from all of the damage, because now we're going into Canada's costliest insured loss events. So we saw last year, and now we get to look at the big ones. And I'm going to do the top 10. If you're looking to get the full list of these, well, CatIQ database goes back to 2008. The Insurance Bureau of Canada does have their PNC, which stands for Property and Casualty Fact Book, that they update annually, and they have data back to 1983. And that's collected from various sources. And then from 2008 going forward, that's CatIQ data. So that information is out there, so you can go use it. So moving in, so number 10 is the Slave Lake Fire from 2011. And this was 528 million for the industry. This occurred in May, where 1/3 of Slave Lake was destroyed in a fire that was caused by arson. The 9th event was the hailstorm that occurred in central Alberta in 2014. It was on August 7th. And most of the damage was in Airdrie, where golf ball to tennis ball size hail fell, causing extensive damage to siding and cars. And that was 546 million. These are all in 2019 dollars, by the way, except for the 2020 events. Those are in 2020 dollars. The 8th event was the Fort McMurray ice jam flooding from last year. This was again 562 million. The 7th event was a tornado outbreak in southwestern Ontario and Toronto flooding in 2005 on August 19th. There was also golf ball size hail, and the GTA basements were flooded. And there were 2 EF2 tornadoes in southwestern Ontario, which caused extensive damage. This was 625 million. The 6th event is the 2018 Ontario and Quebec May windstorm. If anybody lives in southern Ontario, at least did at the time, I'm sure you remember every other house in the GTA at least was missing shingles. Just the vast amount of people that were affected by this was enormous. Call centers for insurance companies just went down because there were so many people that were impacted. This event cost 680 million. It was due to a cold front that had gone through the area. Toronto, Hamilton, Waterloo, and Montreal airports reached gusts of around 120 kilometers per hour, which that intensity then lasted for several hours. There were nearly 600,000 hydro customers that lost power. Trees were downed, roof shingles were ripped off, and homes under construction were severely damaged. The 5th event is the 2013 Toronto flooding. Again, if you're from Toronto, you'd remember this event pretty clearly. It was on July 8th of that year, and there was 924 million of insured loss. There was 126 millimeters that fell in just the one day and broke the Hurricane Hazel record of 122 millimeters. That recording's at Pearson Airport. The fourth event was the June 13th, 2020 Calgary hailstorm at 1.3 billion. Again, the costliest hailstorm on record for Canada. The third event is the 1998 ice storm in the Northeast, where about 5 million people lost power in Ontario, Quebec, and the Northeast US. And up to 200 millimeters of freezing rain might have fallen, according to Environment Canada. The greatest thickness of ice measured was in Farnham, Quebec. And this resulted in 1.38 billion. The second costliest event is the 2013 Southern Alberta floods. They began on June 20th, and they affected more than 100,000 Albertans in 30 communities. The Alberta government had to come in and provide some disaster assistance. And this is said to be about 200 million. This resulted in 1.6 billion. And it was actually this event that caused the industry to then begin offering overland flood coverage, which I mentioned was released in 2015, or at least it started to roll out. Not everybody offered it at the time, but it's certainly being offered by most of the industry at this time. And finally, number one being the Fort McMurray wildfire from early May 2016. Nearly 90,000 residents were evacuated, and this destroyed 2,400 homes and other structures. This came to 3.7 billion. And I believe the economic loss, so the uninsured portion as well, is about double that. So now, to put this in a bit of perspective, just taking all of the things we just saw and the numbers I've thrown at you, I just wanted to compare 2020 to the overall average. So what we see on the screen, Q1, it represents the first quarter, so January to March, Q2, the second quarter, April to June, and then so on. The gray dots are the average of our database, so 2008 to 2019, and the red bars are 2020 losses, which are represented in millions. And the billion-dollar line is highlighted in that black line. So you see Q1 is about on par. It was a little bit above average, as I mentioned. There were some more events last year in the first quarter than usual. Typically, there's about one. The second quarter, usually the highest, and it was the highest this time, but had the added impacts of some two very intense events, including the Fort McMurray ice jam and the June Calgary hailstorm. Q3, a little bit below normal. If we recall that it was the July Calgary hailstorm and the early August Central Alberta hailstorm. Usually we have several events in July. Usually that's our peak of cat season, but we were below normal for 2020. And then Q4 was about on par with two events and in terms of the losses as well. So I mentioned we collect these losses by line of business. Personal is showing in red, blue is commercial, and auto is gray. This is the average of the database, so 2008 to 2019. We can see personal tends to take up most of the pie, with auto and commercial being about even. And in 2020, we saw auto eat into that a little bit, and commercial took a huge chunk out of the personal piece of the pie. And that was a direct result of the Fort McMurray ice jam, which completely flooded the downtown region. So Walmarts were flooded and other large commercial industries, and people were evacuated. So businesses couldn't operate. So that's another cost to the industry. Business interruption, which would be a non-physical damage loss. And then replacing goods and everything like that. So commercial made a huge jump last year, and as well as auto with the hailstorms that impacted particularly Calgary. And this psychedelic graph shows by year the provincial portion of the annual loss. So Alberta's in blue, Ontario's in red, Quebec's in green. The other provinces you can see on the right-hand side. Alberta, we've always called the cat king. And again, why we call cat season in the summer. It's when severe storms hit Alberta. We've always seen Ontario certainly present But then in 2017, Ontario and even Quebec started to come into play a bit more. And this is when we started to see flooding coming in. So we had historic floods, 2017 to 18 and 19. 2018, we also had the added impacts for Ontario and Quebec of the May windstorm and the September Ottawa and Gatineau tornadoes, which had quite a bit of loss. But then 2020, we see Alberta completely takes that back, and a complete changeover back into being the Cat King with just 2 events, really. So now looking at annual catastrophic loss, the colors are the different types of perils that the loss was attributed to. I've highlighted the $1 billion line in the solid and the $2 billion in the hashed. We can certainly see the years we can pick out the major events such as the 2013 Southern Alberta and Toronto floods, the Fort McMurray wildfire in 2016, the 2018 May windstorm, the Gatineau tornadoes, and in 2020 we have Fort McMurray's flooding and the hailstorm on June 13th. And since I mentioned it earlier, where you can go see the Insurance Bureau of Canada's fact book, they have the losses back to 1983, including the trend line. And again, from 2008 onwards, they use CatIQ data, but before that, they do have some information on the events. So if you are interested, you can always go take a look at that as it's publicly accessible. This graph, very similar to the last one I showed about CatIQ data. What I've done is taken all of the colors and just made them red for the cat loss. The gray is allocated loss adjustment expenses. For our purposes, we can call them external expenses to the companies, or basically it's when they paid a third party to come in and assess a claim. So if they couldn't go to the site themselves and see that this claim should be paid out in 20,000, they paid another company to do that, a fee to do that. And so this is the fee. So it's a loss to the event, but it's not physical damage to the loss, physical damage to the event. And those are the notable events that I mentioned, which fall between 10 and 25 million. Again, we don't collect formal losses on those, but here I have multiplied the number of NEs we had that year by 17.5 million, which is the average between 10 and 25. So we can certainly see those additional factors add on to the losses. And I've also highlighted at the top the number of cats in red declared that year, as well as the notable events. And if we take a closer look at those number of events, number of cats is in the red solid line of the trend in the hashed, and the notable events in the solid line and the trend for notable events in the hashed. And so this shows for at least the last decade, the insurance industry has seen an increase in the frequency of extreme events that cause significant property damage. And so I just want to wrap up and say what we do at CatIQ, I'm not saying that this is all attributing to climate change or anything. It certainly could be, but we provide this data for academics or other folks to do what they need to do that research. So using the database, we have some universities, most of the insurance industry, as well as some government organizations and others that use it with whatever they need to do to make sense of loss and exposure data. But I'm going to end it there and open it up to Q&A. So I'm going to pass it back to Barry, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura. Really intriguing talk, and I can assure you that there's a few questions already there, which we'll work our way through. And I apologize to anyone if I skip their question or miss it at this point. We can certainly follow up later with that, and I will use people's first name rather than getting into full names just for it. So, and they may not be in the order that they came in, but I will start off with one from Peter that came in. what is the insurance industry doing to prevent, and that's in quote, redevelopment on known floodplains? He uses the example of the Elbow River Valley in Calgary that flooded in 2013, and where the city is now planning a minor structure for such as a $1 billion that costs only $1 billion for a new hockey rink in the NHL. But I could also extend that to even things like the Don River in Toronto or the Ottawa River, where we have this very hot debate going on floodplain mapping and development. Can you comment on that at all, Laura?
I can provide a comment, but again, I'm not from a specific insurance company to be able to say this is exactly what they're doing. Just general things that I know that the industry is doing. As I've mentioned at the very beginning, between the government and other stakeholders, including the industry, there's a Canadian task force on flood insurance and relocation. So the relocation portion being for those that are in the high risk areas. The idea is eventually, if it looks something, if anybody knows what the US version looks like, the National Flood Insurance Pool, the NFIP from FEMA, Canada doesn't want to copy that because it might not be the best example, and obviously Canada's a bit different, but there's this current task force that's going through the options of how we can mitigate the loss to these events, whether we move the people and have this relocation program, but also for the people that can't be moved and they're in those high risk zones, some sort of high risk flood insurance pool. So I know those are on the radar and they're certainly being worked on. They started, I think, last year. There's a few releases on press releases on them. And I'm sure it will be going on for the next couple of years before it's official. In terms of some other things that the industry or specific companies try and do, there's organizations like the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, and their advisory board is made up of insurance companies. And they look to find what works to mitigate loss to events. So there's things on wind and flood and other things like that. But in terms of anything that can be solved from sewer backup issues, they provide to the industry as well as to anybody details on the sensors or just little things you can have installed into your part of the sewer drain to keep sewer water from going back into your home. And some of the insurers have offered subsidy programs if policy holders are willing to go through and add these features. They might lower the cost. Again, it depends on the insurance company and if they're offering that. I know some municipalities also have subsidy programs if you're looking to make your home more flood resilient. But in terms of, I'd say that's what I can speak to in terms of what I know they're doing.
Great, thank you very much. And a somewhat related question also from Peter. It's an interesting one. I don't know if you can answer it. In inflation corrected dollars, how does Hurricane Hazel compare? And for those that don't know, Hurricane Hazel was 1954 in the Toronto area, and I remember it vividly as a child. So I don't know if that comparison has ever been done, but that changed a lot of things in land use planning and flood prevention.
Absolutely. And of course, everything goes back to, well, this was the Hurricane Hazel flood line and something like that. But to my knowledge, the insured loss events that are known are included in that IBC graph that I showed. And that goes back to 1983. It's entirely possible that someone's done the calculations on it from 1954. I just don't know that information.
Okay, thank you. Dawn had a question. How do you estimate the cost of non-insured losses? For the insured losses, is there a central repository of info on things that are insured?
Okay, so the insured one, I can answer that. So CatIQ, we have the catastrophe database, and we are the only one in Canada that has the level of detail on the losses for the insured losses. So that would be the insured side. CatIQ does not currently do the uninsured portion. There are on the very large events like the Fort McMurray wildfire, and I believe they did it as well for the 2013 Alberta floods. Academics or folks will, somebody doing research will look into the total economic loss from that event. Certainly, sometimes it can take a few years, as that would include provincial payouts, which can take up to a few years. So it's not it's not something you would know right away. In Canada, for the most part, we have very high insurance coverage, where I showed that graph at the beginning that was from Swiss Re, and it showed the global uninsured and insured catastrophic loss. There was a very, very large portion of uninsured there. And that's because in underdeveloped countries, there are floods and wildfires and things that happen there. And insurance just doesn't exist. In Canada, fire, wind, and hail are pretty well all covered on your home. If you have it, if you have comprehensive auto coverage, that's covering everything, even volcanic eruption, probably an earthquake. And so for the uninsured portion, I can't speak directly to that. I know some academics have tried to find metrics behind, is it a simple multiply it by 2, multiply it by 3 for certain types of perils? I said flood is less insured right now. So the factor might have to be larger to make up the uninsured portion. But in terms of the covered perils, insured loss should cover most of it. And then municipal damage, depending if they're privately insured or self-insured, that would be the big aspect. If there's a large gap in the uninsured versus insured. So I don't know any more about the uninsured part.
Okay. There are two questions that are very similar, one from Jean and one from Virginia, related to the agricultural sector. And one is are agricultural drought losses included in your database? And that's drought. The other is, in more general terms, does it include agricultural insured losses such as crop insurance?
So short answer is no. We don't have crop insurance included. And then we don't have drought either.
Okay. And similarly, there was one from Elena on major insect infestations. Are they taken into account when you're estimating losses, or are they not considered insured?
I've never heard an insurance company say that. So how this, speak a little bit to how we declare a CAT. So say there's an event, if it's weather related, we're meteorologists, so we will know about it. So then we reach out to the insurance companies that send us data and see if they've declared their own CAT internally, and they all have their own thresholds where they need to see an accumulated number of claims to their own threshold. But I'll honestly say I haven't gone asking, but nobody then has asked me to then ask the other insurers if there's been an insect infestation CAT. So I can't say, we don't have any in the database. That's about what I can say, but I certainly haven't heard of any event like that.
Okay. A question on, it goes back to when we're talking about how the industry responds to catastrophes, and that is what they may be doing as an industry to increase the use of damage resistant materials. Could be steel roofing, interlock shingles, siding, stucco versus vinyl. Your pictures, for example, on the particularly with the hailstorm, where a lot of vinyl siding that is either ripped off or severely damaged. Is the insurance industry being proactive in any of those changes?
So of course, this will depend on the company. I do know of several companies where they've turned the wording in their policies from, I'm gonna get it wrong, but I'll get the general gist. They replace it, if you had vinyl flooring in your house, they will replace it with the like kind. It'll be the exact same, but just not damaged. And I know some companies are changing that idea to be build back better. So that was damaged easily last time. Maybe we should invest in, put a little bit more money into offering them to build back better and mitigate the chance of loss. Again, this would be dependent on each insurer. And it's possible on the ICLR website, the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. Big fan of them. They do a lot of good work. They might have more details on what insurance companies are doing.
Okay. Couple of final questions. One is from John on, do you provide advice on adapting to an increase in extreme events?
I'll say for the most part, we don't. CatIQ, what we do is we provide the data for stakeholders and decision makers and people working on cost benefit analysis to go and do the work that they need to do. But I'd say at this time, we don't provide advice around that.
Okay. There was a follow-up question, actually, when we were talking about agriculture and infestations and so on. Are losses in the forestry sector included, i.e. large sections of forest resources damaged, let's say by wind versus infestation, BC being affected by the beetle, for example?
Trying to picture if there's a windstorm. So if, let's say there was so if there's a windstorm that damages a forestry area that's commercial and they insured those values, then yes, that would be a loss to the industry. And it would be captured in that sense.
Okay.
It just depends, again, if they've insured that specific part of the business.
All right. And Len mentioned about it being a great talk, and is there an independent watchdog for weather-related insurance claims? What happens in the case of marginal events that are close to an insurance company's threshold for a valid claim?
Is there an independent watchdog for
weather-related insurance claims?
So, and maybe, I hope I don't miss this, but please let me know if I didn't get the point of that. But CatIQ, we have most of the industry participating with us, including insurers, reinsurance brokers, and the reinsurance companies themselves, as well as other stakeholders. And we issue potential high claim events, claim volume events, so like catastrophes. Again, we'll issue an event if there's a chance of it reaching the $25 million threshold, and we'll issue confidence with that. So if there's low confidence, it's possible that it will fall in the notable event area, so above 10 million, but under 25 million.
Okay. Thank you. I think I've captured the ones that came in. I have one question just before we leave. Anybody who knows me will understand where I'm coming from because I'm an observationalist. Can you comment on whether the information that's available, be it in situ observations, remote sensing, radar, forecasts from, let's say, other sources, is that adequate both to do the forecasting that you do and also to do the follow-up analyses? Are there gaps where there are things that could be done better, or data are not easily available that we should be considering to fill? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so in terms of the post-event, so I guess even forecast as well, but kind of anyways, at the time of the storm or something, the U.S. has had the dual pole radars for quite a bit, and they're able to tell the hail size pretty well. Canada is obviously starting to roll those out. That certainly was a bit of a gap, and it's useful for insurers and potentially others to know after an event what exact size of hail fell in a certain region. So again, they can find out what size hail causes what kind of damage to what kind of materials, and that. So that would be a gap, but obviously that's being closed. And then general radar coverage gaps would fall under that. Being able to validate that a storm occurred. So if the homeowner or business is in an area where you don't capture radar, perhaps it was overcast or something, it's hard for the insurance adjuster to go in and say, yes, there was an event that caused this, you figure out if it's fraud or if it was an actual event and so on. So radar coverage, generally, I mentioned a lot of Environment Canada reports through my presentation. So, having more density on, rainfall totals and wind speed and everything like that, same idea. It's helpful to know what the actual intensities were at those events that caused a certain type of damage. So we certainly wouldn't want to decrease our resolution on that. Going forward, more data is better in general. In terms of forecasting, I think it's harder to say. Like models, wind speeds are huge, particularly in city centers when there's expected to be a large event or a strong event. And so just, finer resolution, being able to determine what wind gusts will be in certain areas. But obviously models are getting better and better. But I think that's and same with maybe flood forecasting, but floods generally are put to the regional conservation or even maybe the provincial level right now. So depending if the area does flooding in the spring particularly, but I think that I'll wrap that up there.
Good. Well, thank you very much. A really enjoyable talk. Covered a wide range of extreme events and timing. Reminded us all of what's happened in the past. So we really appreciate you taking your time out of your day to do this. I want to thank Jim Abraham for, I would have said keeping him away from the golf course, but he's grounded now, so that can't happen. And everybody else who sat in. This is our last virtual luncheon talk of the season. We now will pick it up again in September, and we'll keep everybody informed. But in the meantime, for those of you that are interested in CMOS, the Congress is coming up in the late May, June timeframe. It's virtual. It's spread over 2 to 3 weeks. And the program is online. So you can take a look now and registration information. So some of you may be interested in some of the talks that are going to be discussed there. So feel free to go to the CMOS website. It's also, there's a link from our Ottawa Centre, but on the CMOS website under Congress. So thank you, everybody, and wish you all well during the next few months, and that when we speak again, we'll all have a little more flexibility in what we're able to do and who we can meet with. So thank you very much.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you.